Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. Today, I am joined by my friend Lily, who is from the US and Thailand, both at the same time, and shares with us her journey about growing up in both places and relocating back to Thailand, and how she's actually building a new country online. If that piques your interest, then stick around for a little bit longer. You'll come to find out exactly what I mean by that, because I didn't know either before this conversation. It was a lot of fun catching up with Lily, learning more about Chiang Mai and Thailand and how this is actually possible, or maybe possible, to build a brand new country online where digital nomads and people who don't really have a home may be able to find a home, passport, tax residency, all those things. So a lot of fun in this one. I hope you enjoy. Please help me in welcoming Lily to About Abroad. Lily, welcome to About Abroad. It's so good to finally meet you. I feel like it's been a long time coming. How's it going today?
Hi, Chase. Yeah, really nice to be chatting with you. I was very primed to be excited and like you. And I just love seeing your face right now as we're having this conversation.
That's awesome. Well, likewise, I think we've been internet buddies for a while and trading ideas online and into a lot of the same things about the world and digital nomadism and expat life and living in different countries and building different countries. A little teaser there for the audience. So
yeah.
we'll get into all of that. So you're currently not at home, quote unquote, but you're at home, which I think is kind of an interesting thing. So I wonder if you could give us a little bit of context there for the audience.
Yeah. So of the homes that I have around the world, so normally I live in Chiang Mai, which is where I grew up, where I spent the first half of my life as a child, and where is home base now. But at the moment, I'm in Virginia, which is a part of the world that my family's been in for a long time. It's also home. I'm currently staying with my aunt and spending some time with family. And yeah, this part of the world is near and dear to my heart too. Very different places. Chiang Mai and Millboro, Virginia. It's
a crazy dichotomy, isn't it? Because Chiang Mai, I haven't been to Chiang Mai. I've never been to Thailand. I was supposed to go right before I had tickets and COVID had other ideas. So I actually have not been to Thailand nor Chiang Mai, obviously. And so I wonder actually, that's an awesome place to start. I wasn't planning on going here so quickly, but can you describe Chiang Mai to those of us that haven't been there? Because I really actually don't know what to expect, except that it's this haven for travelers and digital nomads that have been going there for years. It's the not Bangkok is my impression, that it's you go there and you have culture and stuff, but people traveling from all over and maybe some temples right next to a co-working space.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is what's in my mind. Where correct me where I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think you're getting at the right vibe. It is definitely not Bangkok. I think so Chiang Mai to me is a Goldilocks city. It's big enough to support a lot of really interesting things, and whatever you're into, whether that's tea or rock climbing, breath work or blockchain, you'll find your people there. And there's enough of that intellectual and cultural density to make it really interesting, but it's small enough that it feels like a small town. You'll run into people that just hopping around town. And so that feels really nice and nurturing. And yeah, as a city to live in, there's lots of different neighborhoods where you can really choose your vibe if you want to be somewhere that feels more urban. But for example, I live near Chiang Mai University, which abuts Doi Suthep, which abuts the mountain. And so I can be in the sort of hip, slightly more built up nightlife area within a 5-minute motorbike ride. But my house is surrounded by trees, and it just feels really peaceful and nice. And if you want to get out of the city, you only have to drive about 30 minutes in any direction out of Chiang Mai, and you're either in the mountains, you can trek through the jungle, or you're just surrounded by rice fields. And I think that's a really nice thing that's conducive to work-life balance, right? It's sort of I want to be in a place that's like really stimulating and has a lot going on, or I want to step back from that completely and I want to just be surrounded by green things. So that's something that I really love.
That's an amazing combination that is so hard to find. I always hear people, I think especially in this kind of like digital nomad world where it's the antithesis of people who are just like, well, I was born here and I'm going to die here. And, this is where grandma and grandpa live. Like this is home, like people that get out and travel around, we become kind of picky and we're always like, oh, if you could only be like, have this city with the nature of that place, and I do it here with Valencia all the time. Like I love the city that I live in, but what I miss about where I'm from and some other places that I've been is like the quick access to nature and the green. And it's more of like a dry, arid place. And I love like, forests and green rolling mountains and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, if I could just have like those, like the mountains of the Pyrenees down here in this city, that would be awesome. And I hear people say stuff like that a lot that are in this sort of digital nomad world. And so it sounds like you've kind of found a place that is that Goldilocks where it's like, oh yeah, it's a nice city, a lot going on, but also nature right there.
Yeah. I think, Chiang Mai is missing a beach, which is like a complaint that comes up for many nomads. I have a couple of friends who sort of like hack this from an SEO standpoint on their blogs because people search for it so often. I think that's funny. But it's easy to get to a beach when you're in Thailand, I guess. And for me, like, I spent high school and college in Florida. And so in high school, I lived like a block away from the beach. So in a way, one of my other homes is a beach and that's a place that I can go back to, right? So there's this notion of like, you can't have the best of like all the worlds if you are facilitated by this like whole remote work lifestyle is a chance to dip around, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you kind of got a little taste of this when you were young. Like, do you think that propelled you into the world that you're in? Like you've already mentioned, we've been talking for like 5 minutes and you've lived in like 7 places.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my life really is just so informed by where I come from. And, growing up sort of straddling cultures, I think that led to a lot of introspection about like my identity and who I am and how I feel and do I belong. And I think it's such like a millennial trait, that so many of us are interested in like self-actualizing as people and like self-growth and things like that. And so for me, my growing up experience has definitely been something that's rich to explore, right? Mm-hmm. And so kind of like my backstory, my family's backstory is that my mom was one of 8 children. She grew up on a farm in northern Thailand, like super rural. And I think she's the only one of her sisters to have finished high school. And my mom also went on to college and got her master's degree, right? So, and then my dad, he's from Charlottesville, Virginia, and just had the sort of travel bug. I think he didn't necessarily fit in socially. And so he was just like, okay, if I don't fit in here, I'm just going to go not fit in intentionally somewhere else, right? I think some people, that may resonate with them. And so he joined the Peace Corps, and that's where he met my mom. And so for me, I grew up and I spent the earlier part of my life in Chiang Mai. I went to an international school that was like really small, really cozy. And then in middle school, which is a wonderful time to move and be thrown into an environment that you have to quickly adapt to, right? We moved to Florida. And that was a chance for me to connect with like another side of my family and just really like becoming a teenager in like a radically different context too, just like pushes you to sort of really like who am I? Who are my people? It's really angsty, but like I think, on the whole, I've benefited from being able to have those different experiences and to look at how my parents made decisions in their lives and think about how I want to use that to inform and shape my own decisions and what I want to do. So I'm really thankful that they were both people who just wanted to do something different and explore. And I've been able to sort of really benefit from that and like find ways to sort of continue to push the envelope, maybe.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It helps shape who you become. And I can totally not necessarily resonate like 100% personally. I won't claim that, but I can resonate, and it resonates with me, the story about your dad, like going off to travel a little bit to kind of like, well, if I'm not going to fit in here, I might as well not fit in Thailand or Berlin or wherever. And that seems to be kind of a common thing when I talk to people on this show. It's like, I didn't really have group here. And I went out into the world and I found my tribe elsewhere. And I think that can be kind of inspirational for people because I mean, look what happened with your dad. Like he met his
Mhm.
wife and he builds a life over there. And then, you know, like you'll find your people.
Yeah. I think that's to me that's something I've often observed when connecting with people in like the digital nomad community is I think that's one of the reasons that people feel really passionate about this lifestyle or like identify with this tribe is because for many of us it's like it's maybe one of the first times that we feel like, oh, these are my people, like I fit in, I belong here, even though we're just like all mutts and coming from like all manner of different backgrounds. It's coming into a peer group where you feel seen and heard and understood because the things that you have in common are not not your passport, it's not the language that you grew up speaking, but it's these kind of like deep traits that you sort of maybe have an attachment for.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And I also think there's an element where it's like when you're abroad, when you're in a foreign place and you're around other foreigners, you can let your guard down a little bit because the expectations are a little bit like there's less strict rules around like what you're supposed to do and not supposed to do in like a social context, because it's like, oh, well, I guess that's just what they do in Thailand. Like there's little things like that. You can dress a little different. You can say things a little, I find people become more of themselves. I've seen that. And I think I experienced that as well. When I first like started traveling abroad, like, okay, I can just kind of be how I want to be, not have to like fit this image, because nobody knows what your image is supposed to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot of us do that. We try on different identities, like in our like youth, right? Like high school, college, you're sort of figuring yourself out as a person. And those of us who have had the wonderful chance to like travel or like live abroad in, the 20s, our 20s are really formative, I think, and those of us who integrate travel get a chance to sort of go even deeper in that. Yeah, no, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it is. I have to ask because like you mentioned this, like moving your life across the world in the middle of middle school. How did you handle that as a kid?
Terribly.
Were you terribly? Okay. No beating around the bush. That was horrible.
Yeah, I was an awkward kid. I was a little bit young for my grade and I've never been like diagnosed with anything, but I sort of, there's people in my family who, are on the spectrum, like have Asperger's. And, when I've like researched like, oh, how does ADHD exhibit differently in like girls versus boys? And I'm like, oh, hit me. And it's sort of been a chance to sort of like reflect on my growing up experience and be like, right, like that's what was going on. So it was a hard time adjusting. And, I'm such a people person now, and I'm so extroverted and I do a lot of like public speaking and things like that. So a lot of people often assume that like, oh, Lily's just like a social person and she's got this figured out. And I'm just like, no, like nobody thought that I was like remotely cool until I was like 20 years old. And I finally like tricked them into like believing this. But for the longest time, I was like, how do you talk to people? How do you make friends? I don't get it.
Where did you learn to talk to people, in the US or in Thailand? Like, where did you kind of find yourself?
I mean, growing up in Thailand, my school was so small, So I was with the same like 15 kids from like kindergarten through like grade 7 or whatever. So
and was that in Chiang Mai?
Yeah, that was in Chiang Mai.
Okay.
And so, you learn to make friends in that context, but it's just the proximity that like brings you together, right? And then I had to figure out how to like make new friends. Figure out how to make like new friends when I moved in like middle school. And I spent like I went to this like small charter middle school in the town of Seaside, Florida. Fun fact: financing for that movie came from the Truman Show. That's like the perfect white picket fence little community where that was filmed. And just as I got through 8th grade and was like, okay, I think maybe I'm figuring this thing out. Then I went to high school, which was like a lot bigger, and I had to figure it out all over again.
Yeah, that's how it goes. I think that's like probably true for people whatever world you grow up in. Like it's like, oh yeah, I thought I had it, and now high school hits you. No, I got to figure it out now. Oh, let's go to college. And now let's go to the real world. So it's but throw in the fact like that you're coming from another. You grew up in one place and now you're going to school in another. I think that adds some spice to that story for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think your teenage years it's just universally awkward. That's just part of like the lived human experience, right? So at the time I was like, why did my parents torture me in this way? But now I can look back and just like see the good in it and just like be like, oh, okay, it's just what made me the person I am today. And it was like a little bit like odd, but and maybe not ideal by design, but I've gotten so many good things out of it.
Yeah, well, who are you today? So let's talk a little bit about like what we got the early years covered, but you're doing some super interesting stuff, like some of the most like dramatic in a lot of ways. Like when you talk to people who are like, oh yeah, I'm moving to this country, or I'm getting a visa for this country or whatever. We do a lot of that on this show, but like you're kind of like building a country and doing it on the internet. And I think all this is really cool. So I would love to just kind of like dive into what is it you're doing today, and like tell us a little bit about the project.
Yeah. So again, this really like so much into my backstory. Like my dad studied anthropology, and so I did the same thing as well. And I like went into the world when I was thinking about my career. I thought I would work like sort of with NGOs and sort of do something to make the world a better place. That was really important to me, and I wanted there to be an international aspect to my life because that's how I grew up, and I wanted to see more of the world. And then along the way, I sort of like caught the startup bug, and I got really like distracted by that whole world. But it was like really fun to sort of be working in tech and creating things. And, I just sort of like meandered professionally. And I seem to have, it's such a blessing to sort of found my way back to sort of merging those two things. I'm really excited now to sort of be doing like impact work, but to really benefit from like, my background and network. So lately I've been working with this nonprofit organization called Plumia. So Safety Wing, the nomad insurance company, the founders from the conception of that company really wanted to do this thing and support this larger mission of, creating like a really like global world, creating a country on the internet and enabling things like global mobility. And, so right before the pandemic happened, the last like big in-person event I joined was Nomad Summit in Chiang Mai. And I was invited because of some of the surveys and like advocacy work I'd been doing in Thailand about digital nomad visas. I was invited to join a panel with Sam Klassen, Sarah Sandnes from Safety Wing, and this guy, Munli Lung, who does some gaming and venture funding stuff. And we just riffed about this idea of a country on the internet. And I was just like so fascinated by it. It made so much sense to me in these different ways. And I just kept bugging the Safety Wing team about it. And they spun off this initiative called Plumia to sort of support that, because they want an entity that sort of exists outside of Safety Wing so that it, got some independence. So it's not like a privately financed thing. It has some legs and is sort of part of like something larger. And it's just started out as like a Discord group and some like webinars where we just like nerded out about things. And it's slowly been starting to take more shape about how we're actually going to create a country on the internet. And I've been talking for a while, so maybe I'll let you invite me in a certain direction.
We've got the whole world of Plumia to explore. I mean, there's a whole country here, so we can. No, so okay, I have so many questions. And so let's just like start for the very basics for anybody that is having trouble conceptualizing, like, what do you mean a country on the internet? Like a country is like a piece of land that has like a fake, like an imaginary border around it. So what does a country on the internet consist of?
Yeah. So one of the really interesting tidbits that emerged from that panel at Nomad Summit was the idea of like taxes and subscriptions, right? They say that the only things in life that are inevitable are death and taxes. But I think we're actually entering this phase where the second thing actually, may start looking radically different. If you frame it a certain way, what are taxes but a subscription that is not optional for you to pay due to the arbitrary location in which you are birthed, or where your parents decide to work to get you citizenship. And these taxes pay for different things like social services. And so if you think about countries as service providers, then you can sort of see like different countries sort of follow through on different things, some better than others. Some countries have really good, social safety net and welfare systems, and other countries have really good policy that is conducive to like innovation. And our access to this has largely been determined just by accident, by chance, by where we are born, right? So what if we reconceptualize what a country is and think about how we can take the best things out of countries and deliver that to people, and they can become members, they can become citizens of a country that provides them with these services, but on a voluntary, on an opt-in basis. Like what is different about taking that approach, and how can such an organization, how can such a country on the internet be taken seriously by other like real countries that have, you know, had their own nation building journeys that are tied to things that you mentioned, like land and like wars and monetary systems. And like one of the bits that I'm working on is just this specific passport piece, right? Like, how do we improve global mobility? Is it possible for us at Plumia to create a passport that will be recognized by countries so that our members, our digital nomad flock, will be able to freely move around the world?
How cool would that be? Like I mean, this is a real thing actually, because there are a lot of people who like just focusing on taxes for a second. Like if you travel the world consistently and spent, a week in every country and just consistently traveled, like unless you're American, where you always have to pay your taxes back to the US no matter what. But for the rest of all the other countries in the world, that's normally not the case. Like where would you pay your taxes? Like in a very, very technical sense, you should file a week's worth of taxes in each of those countries you were in, because that's what that's where you were working, assuming you're working online or something like that. And then if that extrapolates out. If you spend 3 months in a country and 9 months in another country, you're supposed to do that. Like, by the very strict rule of the law. That's the way it's supposed to be. Most people obviously just file in the country that they're from.
Yeah, because it would be bonkers to try to comply with that many different tax regimes, right? Like when you're moving around, that's just unrealistic.
It's not realistic. And nobody, including the people that write those laws, expect that to be the case. Like it's just like, that's just what's written. But I say all that to be like, this is a real problem that like literally every single person that I've ever had on this show and 90% of the people that I talk to have like this issue where they're like, where do you pay taxes? And what are you supposed to do with this and that? And like there's all this like regulation when you leave your home country, and like if you have one foot, one toe outside of your own country, you start running into like red tape and stuff. So it's really cool to think about this idea of like just having a country on the internet and being like, could you potentially like get residency in this? Like, is that the long-term plan, or what do you foresee?
I mean, I definitely think we have to look at this from a very long-term perspective. Like we had like a town hall the other day, and we were talking about building in like our values and constitution, right? Somebody pointed out that on average, it takes a country 16 years to create a constitution, and they use that constitution for about 10 years. And we're just like, oh shit, what are we in for?
Whoa.
But then it's interesting to think about, at least, okay, so for like the passport piece, right? There are some interesting precedents that Lauren Razavi, who is the author of a book called Global Natives, who's really done a lot of research and like writing about digital nomadism and like a more global citizenship kind of future. She recently took on the helm, and so she's the new executive director of Plumia. So we're seeing some things sort of solidifying, and that's really exciting because so many of us volunteers have just been like, we want to do stuff, we want to do stuff, we want to do stuff.
But somebody tell us what to do.
Yeah. It's like, can I just run away with this? Like, is there a budget? What's going on? And so Lauren's really stepping in to help all that happen. And I had her, she was on a panel that I hosted at Digital Nomad Week, where we talked about different approaches to building a country on the internet. And my former colleague, when I was with a company called Draper Startup House, George Ciosi Samuels, he's a super awesome dude, like community builder, and he's really into blockchain and like Web3 stuff. And he was pointing out that, so he's consulting for the government of Tuvalu, which is sort of in an existential crisis because due to rising seawaters, because of climate change, the nation is an island nation and may literally disappear underwater. So they're kind of petitioning to retain their sovereignty and their nationhood. And they're saying like, hey, we may disappear underwater, but we want to still be recognized as a country, even when we don't have land. Yeah. And it's really interesting. They're creating like a digital twin in the metaverse as part of sort of being able to like maintain community long term. And I just think that's so cool because like, okay, so if like the UN or whoever says to Tuvalu, like, okay, we recognize you as a sovereign nation nation state, even if you don't have land. It's like, oh, that's a precedent. What can we do with, right? So that's something that we can keep in mind with Plumia, because many of these like microstates that have happened like have been predicated on needing land. So perhaps there's like an angle for us to pursue there. And on the passport front, there's this interesting precedent where there's like an APEC travel card, which has been in existence for a while, I guess, but you have one application and all your details are stored there. And this travel card gives you the right to enter a number of different countries in Asia Pacific without having to apply for like a separate visa each and every time. This is created for like jet setting business people who are traveling frequently, right? And so again, it sets a precedent for like, oh, can we borrow this framework and this approach? How did these guys get this card made? And can we do the same thing for this like community of digital nomads who are moving around a lot? So yeah, those are sort of like, we're figuring out how to get there.
Okay. So I have two questions that come to mind. One is like, who are you when you say like you're like petitioning, or you're like, who is the governing body here? Like besides the aliens that are like obviously running everything, like who are you petitioning to get some sovereignty?
So I guess it's very vague. Like at some point we want to interface directly with government, but we're still so much in the planning and ideas phase that's still largely hypothetical. But a piece of the Plumia project that I'm working on is creating a white paper about digital nomads and global mobility. So in like 2019, there was like a lot of hubbub and a lot of people were having trouble entering Thailand because there was like this visa crackdown. And for me, this is like intensely personal because I had friends who were like questioning whether they were going to come back to Chiang Mai in like the next season. And also I started dating this guy and he was like, yeah, I might stick around Chiang Mai. I might not. I might move to Vietnam. And so I'm just like, I need to get this man to stay here. So I decided to put a whole bunch of work into creating the survey because I'd heard that like the Thai government was interested in nomads, but they didn't have any data. So I was like, oh, if we can give them data, surely they will be have their heartstrings tugged and also have this like logical reasoning that magically it will create a digital nomad visa. It wasn't quite so smooth, but I think that there's something to that approach. So what we're trying to do with the Nomad Visa white paper is really just advocate for digital nomads as a collective, to put together some information, some data that allows us to interface with government. Because right now people are creating digital nomad visas, but a lot of these are happening in silos, right? Like what does like Barbados welcome stamp have in common with Estonia's digital nomad visa? And what does that look like for their like not very far neighbor, like Georgia, that also has a nomad visa? And then you have a country like Sri Lanka, who's like trialing two different types of nomad visas. And are they speaking to each other at all? And are they speaking to nomads? Do they understand the community's like pain points? So in sort of like, who's the them that we're trying to speak to? It's just our goal as advocates is just to sort of speak for the community and just like create just like a starting point for, how we're going to connect with each other. And we want to do that by providing information.
Super cool. I love that you're like bridging the gap between digital nomad visas and Plumia, and like how like it'll be interesting to see how those two overlap and can assist each other. They're distinct, it seems, but they're also like very, very closely united. And so that the thing you bring up about the digital nomad visas is kind of fascinating for anybody that's really like following this, like all these countries that are popping up, even Spain. Like I'm living in Spain and I'm on one visa and they're introducing the digital nomad visa. And it's like, should I switch to that? Like there's so much. And you talk to the government here and they're like, we don't know, like nobody. So these governments are building these and they like really have no clue. You said like, are they talking to people? Are they getting data? Like, I don't know how much they're getting. I think they're just like, oh, people work remote and come here. We need to figure something out. And like, they just write something down.
It really is a case of like the blind leading the blind because it's like so new. But we got to start somewhere. And so I think we're trying to create just a minimum of order out of the chaos so that we can like not reinvent the wheel. Because like in the end, we all like these countries that are interested in digital nomads and the digital nomads are interested in traveling, right? Like there's got to be so much overlap. So like a lot of what I've done to date to sort of support this type of advocacy work has just been to introduce people to each other. Like I started getting into this in Thailand and because so the organization that I was working with at the time, the Chiang Mai Entrepreneurship Association, like a group of us just got together to produce this survey. and report. And based on that, people were reaching out to me. And I had like many different branches of the Thai government who were saying like, we're kind of interested in nomads. Like, can you tell us about them? And I was just like telling them about each other, you know? And like, to me, I was like, it was an interesting chance to like learn about how government works, because I thought that they were like more organized than that, and apparently not. So I was just letting them know that like, hey, you know, this ministry, this department, like just speak to each other. And then, you know, on this topic of nomad visas, that's actually how I first got connected to Illumide in Bali, because they copied our survey as part of their efforts to advocate for nomad visa in Indonesia. And then kind of like so on and so forth, I got connected to people like all over the world who were involved in this. And this was part of like my entry. This was like the lens through which I think I started connecting with a lot more of like the like global remote work community, just to see what was going on with people. And just that curiosity about people and that desire to be like, hey, you should meet this person. You should meet this person. Let's work together. Like, let's be friends is kind of like what spun into like, yeah, what is essentially my role now with Plumia as like partnerships manager. So it's like this really cool chance to like do shit that I really believe in. That's just like something that I'm naturally doing anyways, because I just want everyone to be fun.
We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This season is brought to you by my good friends over at Insured Nomads. They're the absolute best in the business when it comes to providing health, travel, and medical insurance for nomads, expats, and really just all forms of world travelers. I know insurance is often something that's overlooked when we're fantasizing about traveling the world, but it's absolutely necessity that we address this, because often the policy you have in your home country isn't going to cover you while you're abroad. And it's also a requirement, as a lot of people may not realize, to actually buy private travel or expat insurance, as it's called sometimes, to obtain a visa or even enter certain countries. So fortunately, there are companies like Insured Nomads to help us with this. Not only do they have excellent coverage and great prices, but they're also providing a first-class experience with additional perks and best-in-class technology via their app. It's an amazing experience. I can't recommend it enough. Now, this is a company that was built by world travelers for world travelers. So they know what it's like to find yourself in a difficult medical situation abroad, and they want to keep you from having that same bad experience. So the next time you're planning a trip abroad, whether it's for a week or a lifetime, check out Insured Nomads via the link in the show notes. Okay, now back to the episode. What's your why? Like, why are you so passionate about it, you think?
Maybe because I didn't know how to make friends when I was younger.
You were confined to like just one school system, and now you have the whole world in a new country, and you can make lots of friends in this new world.
Maybe. But I guess, you know, when I moved back to Chiang Mai and I was working remotely and I was meeting these people who were digital nomads, I was like, oh, well, you know, I can bridge these communities, right? Like I can speak Thai, I can speak to local Thai business owners, and I know all these cool digital nomad peeps who have all these skills and opportunities that we can like maybe share. And so I wanted to bring people together. I was like, surely if we can just get everyone together, then like some magic will happen. And yeah, I think because I grew up straddling cultures and communities, I sort of developed this skill set to how to bridge people. And so that's something that like I feel like I just really want to do. And when you meet good people, you know, like especially when you talk to a lot of like entrepreneurs, like that shit's hard. Like building a business, coming up with a brand, launching a podcast, launching a website, like this stuff takes work. And when you meet people, just like, what can I do to like help make that easier for you? And a lot of the times people just want a little bit of social support. And that can be so enriching. So it's like, hey, I just want to help you find friends so that you can succeed in whatever you're doing.
I love it. It's a beautiful why behind anything. Like, let's just be friends. I really think it's awesome. I was going to ask you with Plumia, one thing I wanted to touch on is like, what do you see as the big benefit for an individual? Like, let's just like fast forward and say like, okay, Plumia is now a country, it's online, and like, why would someone end up becoming like a citizen of Plumia?
Yeah.
What's the benefit to the individual?
Well, I think the first part just goes back to that sense of community, right? Like having your people around you, being able to like having your tribe of people who understand you, who can support you. And, you know, that that exists in many different ways, both online and offline right now. But I think that's still like super important part of Plumia is just people coming together around this aligned value system. But yeah, we also want to, help benefit the members by representing the collective. And I think there's a lot of different ways that we could be doing that. So one of the ways is this, can we create this like travel card for our members? Can we create a passport for our members? And one of the little pieces of that I think has been interesting, like intellectually to explore, has been this notion of like a digital identity. We live in a world where like privacy and like what nation states do you trust or not trust are like really front of mind, I think, for a lot of people. And yeah, with these nomad visas, you have to you have to submit a bunch of paperwork, right? And they're like, oh, like my birth certificate or some document that I need is actually like at storage at like my dad's house. Like, do I have to like get that on paper and who do I send it to? Blah, 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 blah. There's all this like weirdness, right? And so one of the things we hit upon is like, well, can't we just like apply once and just like have all this information securely stored? And like, in order to apply, you just like allow a government to make a handshake with this data packet. And it's like, okay, right. Because maybe we don't want governments to be the ones who are holding that data for us. We kind of want some control over it. So who would we trust to handle this, our private records? So like, okay, maybe that's an opportunity where Plumia could come in and we could be like the trusted third party to do this. And someone goes through that hassle just like one time. And, we're the ones who are saying to the governments that like, we promise that these people we send you are trustworthy and based on these quality standards or something like that. But so I think that's pretty open-ended.
Yeah. There's a lot you could offer. I think also like, giving someone, it's becoming like interesting question to ask in a boring way. I think like it's kind of like, where are you from? Where do you live? And more and more people are like, well, how much time do you have? Like I grew up here, but I was born here, and like and now I'm travel 8 months out of the year. Sometimes I live in Bali and sometimes I live in Florida and sometimes I live in Brazil and like, it just depends. And so if you can say like this is not super vital, I don't think, but I do think there's something about the identity. If you're like, oh, I'm from Plumia, like that's my home is Plumia, which is just technically on the internet. It's not a physical place, but that's what I identify as. That's what my passport says. They facilitate everything for me as far as like I pay my taxes there and they facilitate everything as far as like where I live throughout the years. And I get digital nomad access to all these different places and they facilitate it all, like that. There could be as more and more people go down this path, there could absolutely be some really like obvious benefits for individuals.
Yeah. But I think it does just come down, like we're hardwired to belong. We're like, as humans, we are hardwired as social creatures to be part of a group, right? And if you think about like sports teams, for example, people are fucking passionate about their sports teams, to the extent of like a mania. And there's something that really speaks to people about the rituals and the cultures that they engage in as part of following organized sports and like putting their identity in those teams, right? So there's something about that with like community as well. Like, can we take the best parts of like culture and ritual and how we connect with each other and spin that into a country? Because like countries also have this association with like traditions and values and cultures and ethnic groups and all these sort of things. So in addition to the services that a country can provide, I think we can also sort of use Plumia as an umbrella to say like, this is who I am, this is who I believe in, these are my people, and this is how we look after one another.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so fun. That's a really fun thing to think about, isn't it? Like, I know you have a lot of work ahead of you and you don't seem to mind that at all, which is great. It's something that you love and you're passionate about, but it's really exciting to think what it could be. And you mentioned something at the beginning of that, like how we're always like looking for like an identity. We're always looking for like, we started with this, like looking for our tribe. And it is so important. Like we could discount that and be like, yeah, whatever, like I'm from here, I hang out with these people, but it really is like built into our DNA as like human beings. Like that's how we survived for the hundreds of thousands of years. Like you got to find your tribe. Absolutely. And we can't help but want that. So it's very cool that you guys are providing this. I think it's going to be exciting to watch.
Yeah. So I want to ask you a question a little bit about your life in Valencia that like ties into this. So like, who do you hang out with? Like, are you hanging out with like the expat community? Do you have lots of like Spanish friends or like, who's your tribe locally?
Yeah. So I have always been very I really want to get into the local culture wherever I've
Mm-hmm.
lived. So I've lived in a handful of different places or like spent like, periods of months or something in different places. And I'm always like kind of not avoiding, but not really like super attracted to the hyper expatty space. So that has always been kind of like not my goal, but naturally that's where I would gravitate to, is like, how do I get in with like the local culture? I want to experience what it's
Mm-hmm.
like here. But I've been here long enough now for several years where like I've settled into kind of like both worlds. So I have some friends from my home country. I have lots of other expat friends that are from, other European countries.
Yeah.
Or Latin American countries, and then some definite locals that I consider really good friends. So it's a pretty big mix now, I would say.
Yeah. I think going back to making friends, right? It's weird making friends as an adult.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, it
it's
is.
just
It's not
it's
easy.
awkward. And I've often, I think one of the criticisms about the digital nomad community is that we're like insular, or like we're in an echo chamber and we're not local enough. But having explored this from the other side, I just sort of realized like, right, like people who my friends in the people that I know in Chiang Mai, right, who are locals, are like, well, I already have friends. Like, I already have
Yeah.
a professional network. Like, I don't necessarily need more friends. And as I've like, this time around, I've been in Chiang Mai since like 2017 was when I sort of started like moving back. I sort of realized that's happened to me too. It's like at first I was going to like tons of meetups. I wanted everyone to be my friend because I had a handful of school friends that were still in the city, but I had like I was rootless, right? Like despite having some ties like culturally there, I didn't have a community, and so I had all of these like free like tentacles wanting connection, and the longer I've been there, the more those connections have grounded, right? I've rooted myself in a community that's really nurturing. So I don't necessarily want to make new friends. And I sort of realized like, oh, right, when someone's like stayed in a place for a long time, obviously like that's what's happening. All of their like available routes are just, they're already anchored and they don't necessarily have like the energy, the inclination. So it makes sense to me now. It's like, right, that's why expats make friends with expats, nomads make friends with nomads, because it's kind of just partially like an attention span availability thing.
Yeah.
And so it is really challenging to like cross that boundary and like create a really like strong connection with someone when you're an adult.
Totally. Funny story. Like when we first moved here to Spain, like we had spent some time in Spain and some different places and stuff, but we were like, okay, we're going to go to Valencia and spend like 3-6 months, like maybe a little bit longer. Who knows? We'll see what we do. And we had connected with some people like through, my wife had connected with people through Facebook groups and connected with people online that lived here, kind of get a feel for what the community is going to be like. And anyway, like long story short, we were literally like told by some people that were here for a long time, like once we got here, like, look, like you're great, but I'm not going to invest a lot in this because
Yeah.
you're not going to be here. Like you're just passing through, and like I live here and stuff. And it might have seemed a little like harsh or a little off putting at the time. Not really. Like I got it. We got it, but it was still just like, wow. And I totally get that though, because I see it now. I see people pass through here, and I'm like, I kind of live here. I'm not just like hanging out. And yeah, I can see you're going to be on your way, and got my friends. So it is strange how this happens.
Yeah, I to sort of invite this conversation in a different direction, because I know that one of the things we like to focus on too is like families, right? Is sort of I'm sort of in this place, so I'm like 8 months pregnant and thinking a lot about the future. Thank you. It is terrifying and exciting all at once, but yeah, I'm thinking a lot about like what's next, or maybe like where's next, and this idea of like roots and community is really taking on a new shape for me, because it's so nurturing right now to like be around my family. I'm like, oh, right. This is why people stay in their hometowns. This is why people stay where their family is, because you have this access to this like wonderful, like love and nurturing support, ancestral wisdom, and like, raising a baby, like takes a lot of resources. And so I'm just thinking like, okay, like, so in Chiang Mai, like, we have a community, but it's like very young. Like, my husband and I are amongst like the first of our friends to like have a baby. So we're like, oh shit, we need like other parent friends because we don't know how to do this. And so it's like looking at different, kind of like the different options that are going to be available to us and thinking about what community we want to be a part of, not just for us, but for our kid as well. And yeah, it's interesting sort of at this moment in time to just sort of like, basically, because we both work online, it is like, oh, like we could go anywhere. We could be in Chiang Mai, where we have been and where we have wonderful friends, and it's a country that I have a legal right to live in, and therefore I can confer that to my husband. We could go to, the Vancouver area where he grew up, which is apparently an amazing place to live. We could be here in Virginia, where my family are, or maybe just somewhere like completely different. Like I have some friends who are trying to convince us, like, hey, let's go to Spain, buy a village, and start a commune. So there's a lot of different options, but it does like it really circles back to this idea of like community and belonging and like who you want to be with.
Yeah, it's so important, and so for different strokes for different folks, because people feel very strongly towards that, or they feel like, I'm just going to kind of move on and do my own thing. But for me personally, like I'm one of those people that I am close with my family. And so this does not jive well with my desire to live in other countries and immerse myself in other cultures. So I like personally struggle with that a lot. Like I'm like, even though I'm loving this, like I'm missing out on other things, not just close family, but also like, people's weddings, graduations, the birthdays of friends and their children. And so those are all things that like have to be weighed against this sort of like selfish thing of like, yeah, but I like living in Spain right now. Like that feels kind of crappy. But I think ultimately you do have to, like, everybody understands you do kind of have to do what you feel is best for you. And and it's great that you have that like magnet kind of calling you back to have that support system. It's awesome to have that. It's kind of the best of both worlds to have both. And at the same time, it can kind of give you like analysis paralysis where you're like, which one do I do? Like when you have all the options in the world, it can actually be like a little bit stressful because you're like, I have choices. Like I could live in Thailand or Virginia or Vancouver. Like not many people can say that, Yeah.
Yeah. It is like, I think a lot of times about like how fortunate like I am to be like living in this era where like as a woman, I can like have like a wonderful career, and I like and that path is totally open to me thanks to the feminists that came before. As a remote worker, I have my where I choose to live. I don't have to go to where the economic opportunity is. I can go anywhere because the economic opportunity and access to that follows me around, and that's so wonderful. But like, yes, it also does come with this like, okay, like there are just so many different things that you can do, and I think a lot of that figuring out that process is like this kind of like growing up process of figuring out who you are and like what's important to you and what your values are, right? And like and cultivating that and like getting in touch with yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a nice point to kind of wrap things up on and leave people with that, because it's an important part of choosing a nomad life or a life abroad and something to consider. We had so much actually that I didn't get a chance to get to in this conversation. So we could sit here and talk for hours. I want to hit you with, won't call it rapid fire. That sounds cheesy and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I just want to ask a couple quick things. Just give me your quick thought.
Okay.
Chiang Mai, if somebody's coming to Chiang Mai for the first time, what kind of advice might you give to them, or what should they do? Shouldn't they do in a couple bullet points?
Okay, so from the practical side of things, just like land, find an Airbnb or a guest house. And then if you're trying to find longer term accommodation, like go into the groups or like find an agent, right? Don't try to find like your long-term situation before you get there. I think it's easier to not do that. The Niman neighborhood is a really good place. So I recommend staying there if you want a slightly like more urban vibe and you want to be where lots of nomads are, or you can start in the old city. That's going to be a little bit more touristy, but like also more cultural in many ways, because those are both really walkable and easy to integrate with. So make your life easier and do that. And you should definitely hit up some of my friends' businesses because they're great community people. So I recommend co-working at Yellow. They run a blockchain incubator, really nice people, or go to Alt Chiang Mai. It's a new co-living, co-working space. And like John, the founder, is like really heavily investing into like events. And that's anything from like personal branding photo shoots to ice baths. Like it's really great. And Corner Bistro is a really fun bar. And Kevin, the owner there, like I'm so impressed with what he's been able to do like throughout the pandemic to just like keep the community going. Like trivia nights, open mic, karaoke, movie nights. Like it's just such a fun place. So land in Chiang Mai and go to those places.
Wow. I lied. I was going to ask multiple questions, but you answered like all of them in one pretty much. So I think I'm just going to leave it there. That sounds fun. I can't wait to go there and visit, and I'll definitely let you know depending on if you're there or not. I guess either way, I'm going to hit you up for some local tips aside from what you just,
because I haven't told you where to eat yet. And that list is long.
Oh, that bistro isn't an eating place?
It is an eating place, but oh my God, the food in Thailand, the food in Chiang Mai. Yeah. We could have a whole episode about that. So we got to move on to the next question.
That's what I'm talking about. I need some Thai food in my life. That sounds so epic. Actually, I do want to ask you one more question. What do you tell people when they say like Bangkok or Thailand or Bangkok or Chiang Mai when I come to Thailand? Like I got a short window. I feel like those are the two. Am I missing a third one that might be on that list? Like I know a lot of people would go to the islands, of course, but if we're talking mainland.
I mean, the islands should definitely be considered on there because they're different. I would say if you want to be part of that like nomadic community, then like Chiang Mai, Bangkok, or Koh Phangan, KP are like your good options. If like, and each of these has common elements. You can find a little bit of these things in each place. But like if you want nightlife, if you want like cosmopolitan and you are good with lots of like stimuli, like I can't, I'm just like to me being in Bangkok is just like FOMO and like stresses out my nervous system. Like if you want all of that, like Bangkok is amazing. You have everything you could ever want, choice paralysis. But for some people, that's good. If you want things to be a little bit more contained and you want that balance of just like things that are going to slow you down as well as things that are going to stimulate you, then like go to Chiang Mai. If you want to have a bit more of that like hippie vibe, go down south, go to KP. There's a fantastic community there. There is some energy to like do work and like there's a really strong like crypto builder community there, but like for me definitely like the beach slows me down and sometimes I want that, and that's what some folks are looking for, I think.
Oh man, it's a country that's just like captured my heart from a distance. I can't wait to go spend some time there very soon. So all right, Lily, thank you so much for all the information, for all the work you're doing, and for sharing so much like on a personal level, but also professional. I think you probably really connected with some people in the audience today. So really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Chase. It's been, it's been really fun talking at you. I do that a lot. Hopefully that's been...
I ramble a lot, so I'm cool with it if I didn't notice. So no, it's a lot of fun. Thanks again. Okay. We'll chat again soon.
Absolutely. Take care, dude.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.